Let me read to you a passage from the 11th chapter of St. Mark's Gospel, verses 11 to 26. It's the Gospel for Friday of the 8th week in Ordinary Time. I will only read part of it because it is a long passage. St. Mark writes, Jesus entered Jerusalem and went to the temple. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple area and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. When evening came, they went out of the city. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. That is part of the Gospel for today. Mark chapter 11, verses 11 to 26. What does it suggest to us? Well, excuse me, in the popular imagination, I suspect that the picture of Jesus of Nazareth is of a kind and gentle miracle worker, a teacher of the moral life, and a person full of love for the downtrodden and the forgotten. He is a model human being with the best guidance for living a good life. All this is true, but seriously incomplete. To take the matter of Christ's kindness, our Lord could be harsh, and he was feared by the leaders. Contemplate our gospel scene today. Our Lord enters Jerusalem, being acclaimed as the Messiah King by the crowds that accompanied him. He then goes into the temple, gazing on the spectacle before him. This was the house of his beloved Father, and what he saw was the hubbub of talk, the sound of animals being led and sold, business, and the cloud clink of money being received and given. Perhaps appalled, he left Jerusalem for the night, and the next day returned and took action. Single-handedly, he began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." It must have been a stunning spectacle. His voice would have rung out, being heard all over the temple. Those who were buying and those who were selling were ordered to leave. Tables went headlong. Money rolled all over the floor, with their owners chasing it and hastily departing with what they could get up. Animals bleating and bellowing were hurried along the temple area and driven out into the open with their owners scampering after them. The voice of Jesus of Nazareth, acting as prophet of God, was sharp and strong, and all would have heard it. The attention of all was riveted as the holy place was transformed. No one carrying any merchandise was allowed to set foot through the temple courts. Finally, the noise had gone, and all was quiet, with Jesus standing there as master of his Father's house. Then he took his place and summoned the people to hear him. It was yet another display of the strength and courage of Christ, and of his sense of supreme authority in all the things of God. He was not just a kind and gentle inspirer of the good life. He was powerful in his resistance to sin, and nothing could stop him unless he permitted it. Jesus of Nazareth was very strong in his love. His love was a powerful force that unhesitatingly assumed authority in the things that pertained to his mission. The devils recognized this and panicked at his approach. Word must have quickly travelled to the rest of the temple precincts and even beyond to parts of the city that Christ had overturned the customary traffic and had imposed a different regime within the temple. It must have been a sensation among the ruling clique. Probably nothing like this in living memory had happened in the new temple built by Herod. And it could just be that nothing quite like it had ever happened in the history of worship in the city. We read in our gospel passage today that, and I quote, "The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching." The chief priests feared him, as did the teachers of the law, and their resolution hardened. The only thing to be done was to put Jesus to death. As far as they were concerned, power was passing out of their hands. They were losing their hold because the authority of Jesus to teach seemed so absolute to the people. During the Passion, Pilate himself could see that it was because of jealousy that Jesus had been handed over. The point here, though, is that we observe our Lord's strength, his action against abuse and sin, and his sheer authority. Jesus of Nazareth was not just a kindly miracle worker who offered guidance for the good life. He was the man of authority. "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me," he would tell his disciples on his rising from the dead. They were to go to the whole world and make disciples of all the nations. He is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. Long before this, the king at the time complained about the prophet Amos. He was always prophesying bad things about him. If we go through the Gospels, we see our Lord giving dire warnings of the judgment to come and of the fire that will never go out. In our Gospel passage today, he condemns the fig tree to a perpetual barrenness. It is a sign. Our Lord was blunt with sin and severe with those who refused to come to him in a spirit of faith, such as the leaders. Let us not take Christ for granted. He will come again to judge the living and the dead. So, let us so live as to be ready